예, 반갑습니다. 오늘은 이게 조금 긴 프로젝트가 될 수도 있는데, 앨리스 먼로 씨가 그 인터넷에 그 자기 저작권을 주장하지 않고 그냥 공개를 한 15편이 있는데, 그걸 어떻게 해볼까 하다가 결국은 그 15편을 다 할 수도 있습니다. 근데 일단 시대순으로 68년에 이 작품부터 쭉 이렇게 최근 것까지 쭉 공개를 하셨거든요. 그거를 해설 강의를 한번 해보려고 합니다. 네, 해설 강의를 하기에 앞서서 일단 작품을 먼저 한번 감상해 보고 싶으신 분들을 위해서 PDF 파일로 올려놓을 수도 있는데 그것도 생각해 보고 있고요. 그냥 쭉 한번 읽어보겠습니다. 뭐 왔다 갔다 하시면서 그 제 좀 꾸질꾸질한 발음이지만 그리고 별로 여러분들이 처음 보는 거와 똑같이 저도 처음 봅니다. 미리 뭐 읽어보고 뭐 그럴 만한 그런 계제는 아닌 것 같고요. 하여간 좀 꾸질꾸질한 발음이지만 일단 한번 쭉 읽어보고 이걸 올려놓고 그 다음에 해설 강의를 연달아서 하나씩 하나씩 이렇게 올려놓을 그럴 계획인데 많이 성원들 해주시면 15편인가 16편인가 그거를 전체를 한번 해보겠습니다. 어떤 식으로 성원을 해주실지는 생각해 보세요. 이렇게 해보겠습니다. 앨리스 먼로 씨가 68년에 womanlit이라는 잡지에 발표를 한 Boys and Girls라는 작품입니다. 읽어볼게요. My father was a fox farmer. That is, he raised silver foxes in pens. And in the fall and early winter, when their fur was prime, he killed them and skinned them and sold their pelts to the Hudson's Bay Company or the Montreal Fur Traders. These companies supplied us with heroic calendars to hang, one on each side of the kitchen door. Against the backdrop of cold blue sky and black pine forests and treacherous northern rivers, plumed adventurers planted the flags of England and all of France. Magnificent savages bent their backs to the portage. For several weeks before Christmas, my father worked after supper in the cellar of our house. The cellar was whitewashed and lit by a 100-watt bulb over the work table. My brother Laird and I sat on the top step and watched. My father removed the pelt inside out from the body of the fox, which looked surprisingly small, mean, and rat-like, deprived of its arrogant weight of fur. The naked, slippery bodies were collected in a sack and buried in the dump. One time, the hired man, Henry Bailey, had taken a swipe at me and this sack, saying, "Christmas present." My mother thought that was not funny. In fact, she disliked the whole pelting operation. That was what the killing, skinning, and preparation of the furs was called, and wished it did not have to take place in the house. There was the smell. After the pelt had been stretched inside out on a long board, my father scraped away delicately, removing the little clotted webs of blood vessels, the bubbles of fat, the smell of blood and animal fat, which the strong primitive odor of the fox itself penetrated all parts of the house. I found it reassuringly seasonal, like the smell of oranges and pine needles. Henry Bailey suffered from bronchial troubles. He would cough and cough until his narrow face turned scarlet, and his light blue, derisive eyes filled up with tears. And he took the lid off the stove and, standing well back, shot out a great cloud of flame, straight into the heart of the flames. We admired his for this performance and for his ability to make his stomach growl at will, and for his laughter, which was full of high whistlings and gurglings and involved the whole faulty machinery of his chest. It was sometimes hard to tell what he was laughing at, and always possible that it might be us. After we had sent to be, we could still smell fox and still hear Henry's laugh. But these things, reminders of the warm, safe, brightly lit downstairs world, seemed lost and diminished, floating on the stale cold air upstairs. We were afraid at night in the winter. We were not afraid of outside, though this was the time of year when snow drifts curled around our house like sleeping whales, and the wind harassed us all night, coming up from the buried fields, the frozen swamp, with its old bugbear chorus of threats and misery. We were afraid of inside, the room where we slept. At this time, upstairs of our house was not finished. A brick chimney went up on wall. In the middle of the floor was a square hole. 죄송합니다. With a wooden railing around it, 중간에 막 전화가 오고 난리가 아니야. In the middle of the floor was a square hole with a wooden railing around it. That was where the stairs came up. On the other side of the stairwell, the things that nobody had any use for anymore. A surgery roll of linoleum standing on end, a wicker bay carriage, a phone basket, china jugs and basins with cracks in them, a picture of the Battle of Balaclava, very sad to look at. I had told Laird, as soon as he was old enough to understand such things, that bats and skeletons lived over there. Whenever a man escaped from the county jail, 20 miles away, I imagined that he had somehow let himself in the window and was hiding behind the linoleum. But we had rules to keep us safe. When the light was on, we were safe as long as we did not step off the square of worn carpet, which defined our bedroom space. When the light was off, no place was safe but the beds themselves. I had turned out the light, kneeling on the end of my bed and stretching as far as I could to reach the cord. In the dark, we lay on our beds, our narrow life rafts, and fixed our eyes on the faint light coming up the stairwell, and sang songs, Laird sang, Jingle Bells, which we would sing any time, whether it was Christmas or not, and I sang Danny Boy. I loved the sound of my own voice, frail and supplicating, rising in the dark. We could make out the tall frosted shapes of the windows now, gloomy and white. When I came to the pot, the cold sheets, but by pleasurable emotions, almost silenced me. will kneel and say an Ave there above me. What is an Ave? Every day I forgot to find out. Leard went straight from singing to sleep. I could hear his long, satisfied, bubbly breath. Now, for the time that remained with me, the most perfectly private and perhaps the best time of the whole day, I arranged myself tightly under the covers and went on with one of the stories I was telling myself from night to night. These stories were about myself when I had grown a little older. They took place in a world that is recognizably mine, yet one that presented opportunities for courage, boldness, and self-sacrifice, as mine never did. I rescued people from a bombed building. It discouraged me that the real war had gone on so far away from Jubilee. I shot on rabid wolves who were menacing the schoolyard. The teachers cowered terrified at my back. Rode a fine horse spiritedly down the main street of Jubilee, acknowledging the town people's gratitude for some yet to be worked out piece of heroism. Nobody ever rode a horse there, except King Billy in the Orange Man's Day Parade. There was always riding and shooting in these stories, though I had only been on a horse twice. The first because we did not own a saddle, and the second time I had slipped right around and dropped under the horse's feet. It had stopped placidly over me. I really was learning to shoot, but could not hit anything yet, not even tin cans on fence posts. Alive, the foxes inhabited a world my father made for them. It was surrounded by a high guard fence, like a medieval town, with a gate that was padlocked at night. Along the streets of this town were ranged large, sturdy pens. Each of them had a real door that a man could go through, a wooden ramp along the wire for the foxes to run up and down on, and a kennel, sometimes like a club chest with air holes, where they where they slept and stayed in winter and had their young. There were feeding and watering dishes attached to the wire in such a way that they could be emptied and cleaned from the outside. The dishes were made of old tin cans and the ramps and kennels of odds and ends of old lumber. Everything was tidy and ingenious. My father was tirelessly inventive, and his favorite book in the world was Robinson Crusoe. He had fitted a tin drum on a wheelbarrow for bringing water down to the pens. This was my job in the summer, when the foxes had to have water twice a day. Between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning, and again after supper, I filled the drum at the pump and trundled it down through the barnyard to the pens, where I parked it and filled my watering can and went along the streets. Laird came too, with his little cream and green garden can, filled too full and knocking against his legs and slopping water on his canvas shoes. I had the real watering can, my father's, though I could only carry it 3/4 full. The foxes all had names, which were printed on a tin plate and hung beside their doors. They were not named when they were born, but when they survived the first year's pelting and were added to the breeding stock. Those my father had named were called names like Prince, Bob, Wally, and Betty. Those I had named were called Star or Turk or Maureen or Diana. Laird named one Maud after a hired girl we had when he was little, one Harold after a boy at school, and one Mexico. He did not say why. Naming them did not make pets out of them or anything like it. Nobody but my father ever went into the pens, and he had twice had blood poisoning from bites. When I was bringing them their water, they prowled up and down on the path they had made inside their pens, barking seldom. They saved that for nighttime, when they might set up a chorus of community friends, but always watching me, their eyes burning, clear gold in their pointed, malevolent faces. They were beautiful for their delicate legs and heavy, aristocratic tails, and the bright fur sprinkled on dark down their back, which gave them their name, but especially for their faces, drawn exquisitely sharp in pure hostility, and their golden eyes. Besides, besides carrying water, I helped my father when he cut the long grass and the lamb's quarter and flowering bonny musk that grew between the pans. He cut with a scythe, and I raked into piles. Then he took a pitchfork and threw fresh cut grass all over the top of the pans to keep the foxes cooler and shade their coats, which were browned by too much sun. My father did not talk to me unless it was about the job we were doing. In this, he was quite different from my mother, who, if she was feeling cheerful, would tell me all sorts of things. The name of a dog she had had when she was a little girl, the names of boys she had gone out with later on when she was grown up, and what certain dresses of hers had looked like. She could not imagine now what had come of them. Whatever thoughts and stories my father had were private, and I was shy of him, and I would never ask him questions. Nevertheless, I worked willingly under his eyes and with a feeling of pride. One time, a feed salesman came down into the pens to talk to him, and my father said, "Like to have you meet my new hired hand." I turned away and raked furiously, red in the face with pleasure. "Could afford me," said the salesman. "I thought it was only a girl." After the grass was cut, it seemed suddenly much later in the year. I walked on Stubber in the early evening, aware of the reddening skies, on entering silence of fall. When I wheeled the tank out of the gate and put padlocks on, it was almost dark. One night at this time, I saw my mother and father standing talking on the little rise of ground we called the gangway in front of the barn. My father had just come from the meat house. He had his stiff, bloody apron on and a pail of cut up meat in his hand. It was an odd thing to see my mother down at the barn. She did not often come out of the house unless it was to do something, hang out the wash or dig potatoes in the garden. She looked out of place with her bare, rumpy legs, not touched by the sun, her apron still on and damp across the stomach from the supper dishes. Her hair was tied up in a kerchief, wisps of it falling out. She would tie her hair up like this in the morning, saying she did not have time to do it properly, and it would stay tied up all day. It was true, too. She really did not have time. These days, our back porch was piled with baskets of peaches and grapes and pears bought in town, and onions and tomatoes and cucumbers grown at home, all waiting to be made into jelly and jam and preserves, pickles and chili sauce. In the kitchen, there was a fire in the stove all day. Jars clanked in boiling water. Sometimes a cheesecloth bag was strung on a pole between two chairs, straining blueback grape pulp for jelly. I was given jobs to do, and I had to sit at the table, peeling peaches that had been soaked in hot water, or cutting up onions, my eyes smarting and streaming. As soon as I was done, I ran out of the house. 여보세요? 예, 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 예. 예, 알겠습니다. By cutting up onions, my eyes smarting and screaming. As soon as I was done, I ran out of the house, trying to get out of earshot before my mother thought of what she wanted me to do next. I hated the hot dark kitchen in summer, the green blinds and the fly papers, the same old oilcloth table and wavy mirror, and bumpy linoleum. My mother was too tired and preoccupied to talk to me. She had no heart to tell about the normal school graduation dance. Sweat trickled over her face, and she was always counting on the breath, pointing at jars, dumping cups of sugar. It seemed to me that work in the house was endless, dreary, and peculiarly depressing. Work done out of doors and in my father's service was ritualistically important. I wheeled the tank up to the barn where it was kept, and I heard my mother saying, "Wait till Laird gets a little bigger, then you'll have a real help." What my father said, I did not hear. I was pleased by the way he stood listening, politely as he would to a salesman or a stranger, but with an air of wanting to get on with his real work. I felt my mother had no business down here, and I wanted him to feel the same way. What did she mean about Laird? He was no help to anybody. Where was he now? Swinging himself sick on the swing, going around in circles, or trying to catch caterpillars. He never once stayed with me till I was finished, and then I can use her more in the house, I heard my mother say. She had that quiet, regretful way of talking about me that always made me uneasy. I just get my back turned and she runs off. It's not like I had a girl in the family at all. I went and sat on a feedback in the corner of the barn, not wanting to appear when this conversation was going on. My mother, I felt, was not to be trusted. She was kinder than my father and more easily fooled, but you could not depend on her. And the real reasons for the things she said and did were not to be known. She loved me, and she sat up late at night, making a dress of the difficult style I wanted for me to wear when school started. But she was also my enemy. She was always plotting. She was plotting now to get me to stay in the house more, although she knew I hated it, because she knew I hated it, and keep me from working for my father. It seemed to me she would do this simply out of perversity and to try her power. It did not occur to me that she could be lonely or jealous. No grown-up could be. They were too fortunate. I sat and kicked my heels monotonously against the feedback, raising dust, and did not come out till she was gone. At any rate, I did not expect my father to pay any attention to what she said. He could imagine Laird doing my work, Laird remembering the padlock and cleaning out the watering dishes with a leaf on the end of a stick, or even whirling the tank without it tumbling over. It showed how little my mother knew about the way things really were. I had forgotten to say what the foxes were fed. My father's bloody apron reminded me. They were fed horse meat. At this time, most farmers still kept horses, and when a horse got too old to work, or broke a leg, or got down and would not get up, as they sometimes did, the owner would call my father, and he and Henry went out to the farm in the truck. Usually they shot and butchered the horse there, paying the farmer from $5 to $12. If they had already too much meat on hand, they would bring the horse back alive and keep it for a few days or weeks in our stable until the meat was needed. After the war, the farmers were buying tractors and gradually getting rid of horses that there was just no use for anymore. If this happened in the winter, we might keep the horse in our stable till spring, for we had plenty of hay, and if there was a lot of snow, and the plow did not always get our roads cleared, it was convenient to be able to go to town with a horse and cutter. The winter I was 11 years old, we had two horses in the stable. We did not know what names they had had before, so we called them Meg and Flora. Meg was an old black workhorse, sooty and indifferent. Flora was a sore mare, a driver. We took them both out in the cutter. Meg was slow and easy to handle. Flora was given to fits of violent alarm, veering at cars and even at other horses. But we loved her speed and high stepping, her general air of gallantry and abandon. On Sundays, we went down to the table, and as soon as we opened the door on its cozy, animal-smelling darkness, Flora threw up her head, rolled her eyes, whinnied desperately, whinnied despairingly, and pulled herself through a crisis of nerves on the spot. It was not safe to go into her store. She would kick. This winter, also, I began to hear a great deal more on the theme my mother had sounded when she had been talking in front of the barn. I no longer felt safe. It seemed that in the minds of the people around me, there was a steady undercurrent of thought, not to be deflected, on this one subject. The word girl had formerly seemed to me innocent and unburdened like the word child. Now it appeared that there was no such thing. A girl was not, as I had supposed, simply what I was. It was what I had to become. It was a definition, always touched with emphasis, with reproach and disappointment. Also, it was a joke on me. Once Laird and I were fighting, and for the first time ever, I had to use all my strength against him. Even so, he caught and pinned my arm for a moment, really hurting me. Henry saw this and laughed, saying, "Oh, that there, Laird's gonna show you one of these days." Laird was getting a lot bigger, but I was getting bigger too. My grandmother came to stay with us for a few weeks, and I heard other things. Girls don't slam doors like that. Girls keep their knees together when they sit down. And worse still, when I asked them questions, that's none of girls' business. I continued to slam the doors and sit as awkwardly as possible, thinking that by such measures I kept myself free. When spring came, the horses were let out in the barnyard. Max stood against the barn wall, trying to scratch his neck and haunches. But Flora trotted up and down and reared at the fences, clattering her hoofs against the rails. Snow drifts dwindled quickly, revealing the hard gray and brown earth. The familiar rise and fall of the ground, plain and bare, after the fantastic landscape of winter. There was a great feeling of opening out, of release. We just wore rubbers now over our shoes. Our feet felt ridiculously light. One Saturday, we went out to the stable and found all the doors open, letting in the unaccustomed sunlight and fresh air. Henley was there, just idling around looking at his collection of calendars, which were tacked up behind the stores in a part of the stable my mother probably had never seen. "Come say goodbye to your old friend Mac," Henley said. "Here, you give him a taste of oats." He poured some oats into Laird's cupped hands, and Laird went to feed Mac. Mac's teeth were in bad shape. He ate very slowly, patiently shifting the oats around in his mouth, trying to find the stump of molar to grind it on. "Poor old Mac," said Henry mournfully. "When a horse's teeth is gone, he's gone. That's about the way." "Are you going to shoot him today?" I said. Meg and Flora had been in the stable so long, I had almost forgotten they were going to be shot. Henry didn't answer me. Instead, he started to sing in a high, trembling, mocking, sorrowful voice. "Oh, there's no more work for poor Uncle Ned. It's gone, where the good donkeys go." Mac's thick, blackish tongue worked diligently at Laird's hand. I went up before the song was ended and sat down on the gangway. I had never seen them shot a horse, but I knew where it was done. Last summer, Laird and I had come upon a horses and trails, and in trails before they were buried. We had thought it was a big black snake coiled up in the sun. There was a round in the field that ran up beside the barn. I thought that if we went inside the barn and found a wide crack or a knot hole to look through, we would be able to see them do it. It was not something I wanted to see, just the same. If a thing really happened, it was better to see and know. My father came down from the house carrying a gun. What are you doing here? He said. Nothing. Go on up and play around the house. He sent Laird out of the stable. I said to Laird, do you want to see them shoot Mac? And without waiting for an answer, led him around to the front door of the barn. Opened it carefully and went in. Be quiet, or they'll hear us, I said. We could hear Henry and my father talking in the stable. Then the heavy shuffling steps of Mac being backed out of his door. In the loft, it was cold and dark. Thin, crisscrossed beams of sunlight fell through the cracks. The hay was low. It was rolling country, hills and hollows, slipping under our feet. About 4 feet up was a beam going around the walls. We piled the hay up in one cone, and I boosted Laird up and hoisted myself. The beam was not very wide. We crept along it with our hands, flat on the barn walls. There were plenty of knot holes, and I found one that gave me the view I wanted. A corner of the barnyard, the gate, part of the field. Laird did not have a knot hole and began to complain. I showed him a widened crack between 2 boards. Be quiet and wait. If they hear you, you'll get us in trouble. My father came in sight, carrying the gun. Henry was leading Mac by the halter. He dropped it and took out his cigarette papers and tobacco. He rolled cigarettes for my father and himself. While this was going on, Mac nosed around in the old dead grass along the fence. Then my father opened the gate and they took Mac through. Henry led Mac away from the path to a patch of ground, and they talked together, not loud enough for us to hear. Mac again began to searching for a mouthful of fresh grass, which was not found. My father walked away in a straight line and stopped short at a distance, which seemed to suit him. Henry was walking away from Mac too, but sideways, still negligently holding on to the halter. My father raised the gun, and Mac looked up as if he had noticed something, and my father shot him. Mac did not collapse at once, but swayed, lurched sideways, and fell, first on his side. Then he rolled over on his back and, amazingly, kicked his legs for a few seconds in the air. At this, Henry laughed, as if Mac had done a trick for him. Laird, who had drawn a long, groaning breath of surprise when the shot was fired, said out loud, "He's not dead." And it seemed to me it might be true. But his legs stopped. He rolled on his side again. His muscles quivered and sank. The two men walked over and looked at him in a businesslike way. They bent down and examined his forehead where the bullet had gone in, and now I saw his blood on the brown grass. Now they just skinned him and cut him up, I said. Let's go. My legs were a little shaky, and I jumped gratefully down into the hay. Now you've seen how they shoot a horse, I said in a congratulatory way, as if I had seen it many times before. Let's see if any barn cats had kittens in the hay. Laird jumped. He seemed young and obedient again. Suddenly I remembered how, when he was little, I had brought him up. I had brought him into the barn and told him to climb the ladder to the top beam. That was in the spring, too, when the hay was low. I had done it out of a need for excitement, a desire for something to happen so that I could tell about it. He was wearing a little burky brown and white checked coat made down from one of mine. He went all the way up just as I told him and sat down from one of the beams with the hay far below him on one side and the barn floor and some old machinery on the other. Then I ran screaming to my father. Layers up on the top beam. My father came. My mother came. My father ran up the ladder, talking very quietly, and brought Lair down under his arm. Whereas my mother leaned against the ladder and began to cry. They said to me, "Why weren't you watching him?" But nobody ever knew the truth. Lair didn't know enough to tell. But whenever I saw the brown and white checked coat hanging in the closet or at the bottom of the rack back, which was where it ended up, I felt a weight in my stomach, the sadness of unexercised guilt. I looked at Laird, who did not even remember this, and I did not like the look on this thin, winter-paled face. His expression was not frightened or upset, but remote, concentrating. Listen, I said in an unusually bright and friendly voice. You aren't going to tell, are you? No, he said absently. Promise, promise, he said. I grabbed the hand behind his back to make sure he was not crossing his fingers. Even so, he might have a nightmare. It might come out that way. I decided I had better work hard to get all thoughts of what he had seen out of his mind, which it seemed to me could not hold very many things at a time. I got some money I had saved, and that afternoon we went into Jubilee and saw a show with Judy Canova, at which we both laughed a great deal. After that, I thought it would be all right. 2 weeks later, I knew they were going to shoot Flora. I knew from the night before, when I heard my mother ask if the hay was holding out all right. And my father said, well, after tomorrow, there'll just be the cow, and we should be able to put her out to grass in another week. So I knew it was Flora's turn in the morning. This, this time, I didn't think of watching it. There was something to see just one time. I had not thought about it, very often since. But sometimes when I was busy working at school or standing in front of the mirror, combing my hair and wondering if I would be pretty when I grew up, the whole scene would be flash into my mind. I would see the easy, practiced way my father raised the gun and hear Henry laughing when Mac kicked his legs in the air. I did not have any great feelings of horror and opposition, such as a city child might have had. I was too used to seeing the death of animals as a necessity by which we lived. Yet I felt a little ashamed, and there was a new weariness, a sense of holding off in my attitude to my father and his work. It was a fine day, and we were going around the yard, picking up tree branches that had been torn off in winter storms. This was something we had been told to do, and also we wanted to use them to make a teepee. We heard Flora whinny, and then my father's voice and Henry's shouting, and we ran down to the barnyard to see what was going on. The stable door was open. Henry had just brought Flora out, and she had broken away from him. She was running free in the barnyard from one end to the other. We climbed on the fence. It was exciting to see her running, whinnying, going up on her hind legs, prancing and threatening like a horse in a western movie. An unbroken ranch horse, though she was just an old driver, an old Sawyer mare. My father and Henry ran after her and tried to grab the dangling halter. They tried to work her into a corner, and they had almost succeeded when she made a run between them, wild-eyed, and disappeared round the corner of the barn. We heard the rails clatter down as she got over the fence, and Henry yelled, "She's in the field now." That meant she was in the long, L-shaped field that ran up by the house. If she got around the center, heading toward the lane, the gate was open. The truck had been driven into the field this morning. My father shouted to me because I was on the other side of the fence nearest to the lane. "Go shut the gate." I could run very fast. I ran across the garden, past the tree where our swing was hung, and jumped across the ditch into the lane. There was the open gate. She had not got out. I could not see her up on the road. She must have run to the other end of the field. Their gate was heavy. I lifted it out of the gravel and carried it across the roadway. I had it halfway across when she came in sight, galloping straight toward me. There was just time to get the chain on. Laird came scrambling through the ditch to help me. Instead of shutting the gate, I opened it as twice as I could. I did not make any decision to do this. It was just what I did. Flora never slowed down. She galloped straight past me, and Laird jumped up and down, yelling, "Shut it, shut it," even after it was too late. My father and Henry appeared in the field a moment too late to see what I had done. They only saw Flora heading for the township road. They would think I had not got there in time. They did not waste any time asking about it. They went back to the barn and got the gun and the knives they used and put these in the truck. Then they turned the truck around and came bounding up the field toward us. Laird called to them, "Let me get too. Let me go too." And Henley stopped the truck and they took him in. I shut the gate after they were all gone. I suppose Laird would tell. I wondered what would happen to me. I had never disobeyed my father before, and I couldn't understand why I had done it. I had done it. Flora would not really get away. They would catch up with her in the truck, or if they did not catch her this morning, somebody would see her and telephone us this afternoon or tomorrow. There was no wild country here for her. We needed the meat to feed the foxes. We needed the foxes to make our living. All I had done was make more work for my father, who worked hard enough already. And when my father found out about it, he was not going to trust me anymore. He would know that I was not entirely on his side. I was on Flora's side, and that made me no use to anybody, not even to her. Just the same, I did not regret it. When she came running at me, I held the gate open. That was the only thing I could do. I went back to the house, and my mother said, "What's all the commotion?" I told her that Flora had kicked down the fence and got away. "Your poor father," she said. "Now he'll have to go chasing over the countryside." "Well, there isn't any use planning dinner before one." She propped the ironing board. I wanted to tell her, but thought better of it and went upstairs and sat on my bed. Lately, I have been trying to make my part of the room fancy, spreading the bed with all the lace curtains, and fixing myself a dressing table with some leftovers of cretonne for a skirt. I plan to put up some kind of barricade between my bed and Laird's to keep my section separate from his. In the sunlight, the lace curtains were just dusty rags. We did not sing at night anymore. One night, when I was singing, Laird said, "You sound silly." And I went right on, but the next night I did not start. There was not so much need to anyway. We were no longer afraid. We knew it was just old furniture over there, old jumble and confusion. We did not keep to the rules. I still stayed away after Laird was asleep and told myself stories, but even in these stories, something different was happening. Mysterious alterations took place. A story might start off in the old way, with a spectacular danger, a fire, or wild animals, and for a while I might rescue people. Then things would change around, and instead somebody would be rescuing me. It might be a boy from our class at school, or even Mr. Campbell, our teacher, who tickled girls under the arms. And at this point, the story concerned itself at great length with what I looked like, how long my hair was, and what kind of dress I had on. By the time I had these details worked out, the real excitement of the story was lost. It was later than 1 o'clock when the truck came back. The tarpaulin was over the back, which meant there was meat in it. My mother had to heat dinner up all over again. Henry and my father had changed it from their bloody overalls into ordinary working of oars in the barn. And they washed arms and necks and faces at the sink and splashed water on their hair and combed it. Laird lifted his arm to show off a streak of blood. We shot old Flora, he said, and cut her up in 50 pieces. Well, I don't want to hear about it, my mother said. And don't come to my table like that. My father made him go. Was the blood off? We sat down and my father said, Grace, and Henry pasted his chewing gum on the end of the fork, the way he always did. When he took it off, he would have us admire the pattern. We began to pass the bowls of steaming, overcooked vegetables. Laird looked across the table at me and said proudly, distinctly, Anyway, it was her fault. Flora got away. What? My father said. She could have shut the gate, and she didn't. She just opened it up, and Flora ran out. Is that right? My father said. Everybody at the table was looking at me. I nodded, swallowing food with great difficulty. To my shame, tears flooded my eyes. My father made a cut sound of disgust. What did you do that for? I didn't answer. I put down my fork and waited to be sent from the table, still not looking up. But this did not happen. For some time, nobody said anything. Then Laird said matter-of-factly, She's crying. Never mind, my father said. He spoke with resignation, even good humor, the words which observed and dismissed me for good. She's only a girl, he said. I didn't protest that, even in my heart. Maybe it was true. Okay, that's all. 다음 시간에 다시 그 연결해서 뭐 해설 강의를 해보겠습니다. 큰일 없으면.